Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon and I'm here with Jake Ziegler. On Never Did It, we take a look at the past 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. I did it! I remembered it by heart.
Very proud of you.
Thank you. Today, we're doing the year 1985. No Back to the Future. We've seen it. We are doing, but we're doing a different one that you're gonna be shocked that Jake hasn't seen, and one you might be surprised I haven't seen. Why don't we start with Witness? Tell me why you gave me this movie that to me up until this point had only been a meme.
Witness is it's a movie I hadn't seen in a very long time. I probably saw it last back in high school, maybe even early college. It was when I started kind of going back and watching all the Best Picture nominees for the Oscars. I had gotten into the Oscars probably in like the mid 90s and then really started getting into them in 1997, the year that Titanic won. That was like the first year I got like really into it. But anyway, around that time I started going back and trying to watch all the Best Picture nominees, and I got, into the 80s and stuff, and Witness was one of those movies. So that was when I first kind of discovered it. It's also the only movie Harrison Ford's ever been nominated for an Oscar for. I guess The Fugitive wasn't very good, according to the Academy. Although, I shouldn't say that The Fugitive was up for Best Picture, too. It's just Harrison Ford didn't get nominated then. But anyway, so that was when I had first seen Witness, and I remembered really liking it back then. And, just looking at movies from 1985, again, I had to look at the ones that I'd seen. I was like, man, I haven't seen that in a long time. I would really like to rewatch it, because I remember really liking it. It's Harrison Ford. It's directed by Peter Weir, who not too long ago, within the last couple of months, I think, officially announced his retirement. I mean, even though he hasn't made a movie in, was The Way Back his last movie?
The Way Back, yeah. I saw that in theaters, and it has become completely forgotten. If you want to talk about forgotten movies, no one talks about this movie, even though Ed Harris is the lead, and everything Ed Harris does should be celebrated forever. And Saoirse Ronan, it's like an early role for her,
really?
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a bunch of people are walking through Russia. It's forgettable. But Peter Weir is not forgettable because he made The Truman Show.
Yep. Peter Weir, he didn't officially announce his retirement anyway, so that got me thinking about him. I mean, he did The Truman Show. Master and Commander, I think, is very good, and he's got some other, good movies. So that got me thinking, like, yeah, Witness, that'd be a good one to go back and revisit. So that was why I had picked it for you, is because I remembered it being good, and I wanted to rewatch it.
And on rewatch, did it hold up?
For me, yes, it did. I still think it's really good. I think it's a great thriller. I think it's a really interesting and compelling love story. I think Ford is fantastic in it. I think it's a really interesting story. I think it's a cool thing that they come up with. I think the opening scene, I think, is awesome. I think it's one of the coolest kind of setups for a movie that I can remember seeing. For me, yeah, it held up way better than I even thought it was going to.
When you say opening scene, do you mean the walk to and then walk through the funeral, or do you mean the train station murder scene?
I do mean the train station murder scene.
Okay, so that's not the opening scene, but that is a great scene.
That's what I mean, yeah. Where the movie kind of takes off is what I mean.
I actually think the funeral scene, while not exciting, is really interestingly filmed, because a lot of it's a tracking shot. And if you were to watch the movie blind, knowing nothing else, you would think that Alexander Godunov is the main character of this movie, because he's the person that we're following. Alexander Godunov, who later became famous for being the blonde guy in Die Hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, everyone in this movie later became more famous for doing something else. I was saying to my wife as we watched it, this is the movie that happened before every single person in it popped off.
Yeah.
Because you've got Danny Glover as one of the villains, and this is pre-Lethal Weapon.
Yep.
You've got, Harrison Ford was famous already, like majorly famous already.
Star Wars and Indiana Jones had already happened.
Yeah, right. But Kelly McGillis, this is pre-Top Gun. McGillis, sorry. I've always called her that. Joseph Summer was never really famous to American fans anyway, but this is still pre-Mighty Ducks 2, where he plays Han's brother Jans, or cousin or something. Lucas Haas is a child star in this, so this probably is his breakout, but it's before all the teen and horror movies he was in. Plus Brick is great, by the way. Just plug for Brick.
Oh, I love Brick. Yeah, I don't remember it very well because it's been a while, but I remember what I remember of it. I really like.
Right. Sorry, I said Joseph Summer. He is a Mighty Ducks person. He was in Mighty Ducks 1. He's the eponymous Mr. Ducksworth in the Mighty Ducks.
That's right.
But it's actually Jan Rubes who plays Jan, Hans's brother, in the sequel to the Mighty Ducks. And then also Brent Jennings is in this, who has always just been like a sort of side character actor, but great in everything. And then Patti LuPone, who's famous for other things, more for being on Broadway than for being in movies, but was great in just last year in Beau is Afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And then, very importantly, this is Viggo Mortensen's first movie.
Does he even have a line in English? I know he says like one or two things in German, but I don't think he has a line in English.
Maybe when Die Hard guy gets punched, or when Harrison Ford defends Die Hard guy,
Yeah,
there might be a line in English then. But for a while, I was like, oh, Vigo's not even going to speak.
yeah.
So I didn't like it as much. I thought the movie was good.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I
Like,
was surprised it held up for me as much because I happened to see your review before I rewatched it. I was like, oh man, maybe this one isn't going to be as good. And then I watched it. I was like, nope, I still love it.
I just think nostalgia is very powerful. It gets to what we were talking about in the last episode, where we can remember every line from a movie. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that just hooks into you in a way where you're not going to have your enjoyment of it dampened in a significant way. Like, I keep telling you to watch Last Action Hero, but I actually don't know if you're going to like it that much.
Mm-hmm.
I just, when I watch it, I'm like, this is so perfect. I remember all these lines, but not just that. I do find new things to like about it now. And it has had kind of a reappraisal. But I like it more now than I used to. But even still, I don't expect that you're going to like it as much as I do.
I mean, we just talked on our last episode. We talked about this with Touch of Evil. I mean, I have this whole past relationship with it that you didn't have, and I love the movie, and you liked it okay.
Right. This movie actually has kind of a lot in common with Touch of Evil in that you could it's a thriller in the traditional sense, but it's a little noirish. I mean, there's a conspiracy going on with the cops, and
Mm-hmm.
the good guy has to go on the lam. And here the good guy is very flawed.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked about it was, in the end, nobody really compromises about who they are. Oh my god, Kelly McGillis is so hot in this movie.
Yeah.
If this movie were to come out today, it would inspire so much inappropriate adult content for the Amish community. It's pretty
Oh,
wild. I was very surprised at how someone's asked this to me. We had a little gathering at my house yesterday, and one of my neighbors asked, because I mentioned that I just watched this, and he goes, "Oh my god, how are the Amish portrayed in the '80s?" And I looked at him and I said, shockingly respectfully.
yeah. I mean, they really are.
At no point are they made to seem odd, or in fact, the people who treat them as being odd are seen as hillbillies and like just jerks. It is the most, I couldn't believe that at no point were they making fun of them. It's so different than like Weird Al doing
Yeah.
Amish Paradise, basically, is the only real connection I can think of. Yeah, so in that regard, it's pretty cool. I just thought it was kind of boring, frankly.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, the story, if anybody, who hasn't, we haven't really touched on like the plot, or like we talked about the train station or whatever. The story, how it kicks off is there's when we talk about the funeral at the beginning, Kelly McGillis plays a widow who is traveling from Amish country in Pennsylvania. They're traveling to Baltimore. She's with her young son. They're in a train station. The son is in a public bathroom, and a murder happens in this bathroom, and it's brutal too. Like, I'm watching this like, oh my gosh, I didn't remember this was this bad. But it's and spoiler alert, we see who it is right away. Not really a spoiler, but it's Danny Glover and this other guy, and they straight up just cut this guy's throat. And the murderers weren't aware that this little boy was in one of the stalls. And it's a really, really great scene where the boy avoids them because they hear something. One of the killers hears something, so Danny Glover starts like banging on the doors, and kicking the doors in to see if there's somebody in there, and the boy cleverly avoids him. And I love that scene. I think that's really, really cool. And then it turned Harrison Ford is the cop, John Book, great cop name.
No, it's not. When he said his name, I started laughing so hard. I'm like, give me a break. The name's Book. John Book. Stop it.
I'm surprised nobody said they were going to throw the book at him.
Well, when he said it, I turned to Annie and said, no, it isn't.
Whatever. I like it. Anywho, he's investigating the crime, and of course he needs to talk to the boy and the mother. And as it turns out, as we know pretty early on, some of Harrison Ford's colleagues are in on this murder. He needs to hide from them, so he goes to hide out in Amish country. Of course, Kelly McGillis, very beautiful, and they have this kind of romantic tension, but it doesn't progress in a way that I think a lot of romances do, where it's like, okay, they're obviously just gonna hook up and sleep together, but it doesn't kind of progress in that way. There's a lot of scenes where they're really shown as equals.
He's very much on the back foot because he's been injured. Mm-hmm. He doesn't even want to be there. Right. He's been badly injured in his escape from Danny Glover, so he needs to heal. And then once he heals, he has to make sure that his cop friend is okay. Spoiler. Friend is not okay.
Right.
And then he has to formulate a plan to clear his own name because he's being framed for these murders, or at least for suspicion, like something is off with him, and to finger the guys who he knows did it. Yeah, so for a lot of it, he's really at their mercy, which is why, and like I said, the movie treats this community very respectfully. He's not acting like they're weird. He's learning about them and helping them because what else can he do? He's really at a loss for what to do, which is a cool maybe I like the movie a little more than I thought.
Well, like even when he has the gun, the boy discovers his gun and he agrees right away. He's like, nope, well, you can take it away from me, put it somewhere where he can't find it. He doesn't want to have his gun out. He agreed. Yeah, he really agrees kind of right away to live their life while he's there. And I think that's kind of a really cool dynamic that he sets up where he's not subservient. That's not the word I'm looking for. That's too
but
far.
He's indebted to them for sure.
There we go. Yeah, definitely indebted to their kindness and what they've done for him. Gosh, there's that really cool scene where he and Kelly McGillis. I love the scene where they're dancing together, where he finally gets her to loosen up a little bit. Of course, that gets her in trouble with and she's in danger of being shunned, even though she hasn't really done anything wrong and really anything against their religion. And I think there's just a lot of really cool dynamics at play in this love story that aren't present in a lot of other love stories. Like just take the next year when Kelly McGillis did Top Gun with Tom Cruise. Very different kind of love story. It's like, oh, two hot people, they see each other and they get together like almost right away. There's not a lot of romantic tension there. There's just so much tension that they build up between the two of them, and when they finally have spoiler when they finally get together and have their big kiss and everything, it's I think it's a really, really earned moment that a lot of romances just kind of take for granted. It's like, okay, here's the two hot lead characters, eventually they're gonna kiss, here it is. I think it's a really, really earned moment in this movie.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's cool because Weir does a lot of things really expertly that I think other in lesser hands wouldn't happen. Like you mentioned the gun scene, which I also when he gave her the gun right away, I said aloud, "Oh, didn't see that coming."
Yeah.
And I thought he was going to be a jerk about it, but it sets up later where he has to demand the gun back. And that scene where he is finally a little bit more assertive because he's feeling healed now. It's a perfect example of where he is. He can't do anything. He knows it. He has to just appease the people who are helping him. Later on, when he's strong, he doesn't feel that way anymore. And that's also when he starts doing things they are telling him not to do. Like there's this great scene where they go into town so he can use the phone, but everyone else had business in town too. And typically tourists, like the Amish community has sort of an agreement with these tour guides because they don't want to be photographed, but at the very least they'll be gawked at. But sometimes the tourists and the townies berate them. And Harrison Ford has no patience for this. The community does not want him to interact because they don't want the balance to be bothered at all. And at this point, John Book doesn't care about that anymore. And you can see that this is also why, in the end, Book, spoiler alert, Book and I forget Kelly McGinnis's character's name because it's not as stupid as John Book. This is why they can't be together, because even though it seemed like he would not necessarily like take on their way of life, but at least be super respectful of it, that isn't actually who he is. Who he is this rough guy who is single at his, actually, I think he was only like 35 years old at the time.
Yeah.
But he's not going to be in her life after this.
There's this amazing line in the movie too, and it's after, I think it's after they have that dancing, that scene where they dance and she gets in trouble. Or no, maybe it's after they kiss. Whenever it is, he's got this amazing line where he says, "If we slept together last night, I would have had to stay, or you would have had to leave." And that just kind of sums up, the whole conflict that of yeah, they can't. They just can't.
But it's interesting because he says that, and that's like a very movie line. But what you get from his journey and the way he treats people at the beginning, how it changes in the middle, and how it reverts back to his original ways at the end. He says, or I would say here, or you would leave. But really, what he's saying is, you would leave, right? Like I would make you leave with me because that's who he is.
Well, and if she had done that, I mean, there's no way she could have stayed in the community. I mean, that would have been so.
Well, there's that aspect of it too, but so in the end, she probably winds up with Die Hard villain, and that's fine because he's good. He's a little cocky, but he's a good guy.
And there's like nothing wrong with him, and even I know you mentioned the barn building sequence was long. Was
so long. Why did they do it for the? Okay, all you need for that sequence, they raise the barn. He has good interactions with 2 or 3 characters. You move on. Another 5 minutes of them just standing around. When they got to dinner, I was like, thank God they're eating. Like, why were we with the barn for so long?
But they did at least show like him and the Die Hard guy. They were exchanging, they were helping each other with tools and like doing all that sort of stuff. So they had like that, and I like that they didn't make that guy a dick like at all. It's just like this guy was totally okay. I think a lot of lesser movies again would have made that guy kind of at least
a foil.
Yeah, some kind of foil, at least like where he wasn't happy that this character was there. And maybe he was unhappy, a little bit. A lot of people were a little bit unhappy that he was there and a little bit, where their lives were being disrupted or whatever. But he certainly wasn't a bad guy. And like I said, he wasn't really a foil for him at all. He was he's a pretty good guy.
Right. And in the end, that's important because they all get his back. And I love the way that the title of the movie actually has several meanings throughout the movie. So who's the witness? It's the little boy, right? Who's the witness later? Well, now John Book knows once the little boy realizes who the killer is. Now John Book is witness to this. And at the end, all of the rest of the community shows up to pay witness so that the police chief can't shoot Book without and get away with it.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay, so maybe it's better than I gave it credit for, but I'll give the barn scene credit because that is Viggo Mortensen's first scene in a movie. So you somehow hadn't seen Clue.
Yeah, what the hell?
That's crazy.
I know.
Clue was directed by Jonathan Lynn, and Jonathan Lynn, I think, is one of the all-time great comedy directors. He directed Clue, he directed My Cousin Vinny, and he directed Greedy, which I think is a crazy underrated movie starring Kirk Douglas and Michael J. Fox.
Never did it.
So it's basically about, it's a similar story to Knives Out, but if there was no murder. It's like there's an old man, everyone wants his fortune. Ed Begley Jr.'s in it. It's so funny. He also did The Whole Nine Yards, but we don't have to talk about that.
I've never liked The Whole Nine Yards.
Okay, so we can talk about it. Anyway, he's an amazing comedy director, and Clue is an amazing comedy. It stars Christopher Lloyd, Madeline Kahn, Eileen Brennan, Michael McKean, Martin Mull, and very importantly, Tim Curry. How had you not seen it? I've seen this movie probably 50 times. How have you not seen it?
I don't know. I have no idea how I haven't seen this. I mean, my wife had seen it. Most of my friends have seen it. There's no reason I hadn't. It wasn't like I was going out of my way not to see it, or there was any reason that I didn't want to see it or anything. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know why I hadn't seen it, but boy, am I glad I finally got around to it, because I laughed my ass off through most of it.
Yeah, it's really funny. So for those who don't know, all two of you, Clue is the proto Barbie in that it's a movie based on a toy, but really it's a send up of like Agatha Christie style murder mysteries, which the game is. And they take a real
Jumanji, it's based on a game. Proto Jumanji,
But Jumanji is not based on a board game. Jumanji's made up.
Was Jumanji not a game before?
No.
Did they make it a game after the movie?
Yeah.
I don't know anything.
Okay. Oh, you don't remember playing Jumanji with your friends growing up?
I also never saw Clue, so you know.
You've seen the game Clue in people's like closets. You've never seen Jumanji in people's closets. Did they make Jumanji into a real game?
Yeah, I have it.
Oh,
I found it at a thrift store, and I was like, "Oh, hey, we should get this and play it."
You are playing the novelization of a game, not a game based on a novel. You know what I mean? It's like
I also didn't see the Jumanji movie until like 2 years ago, the Robin Williams one.
Yeah,
so
it's not very good.
It's terrible. I had a hard time with it.
Clue. So yeah, it's really more of like a National Lampoon SNL style film. It feels like Airplane. It feels like a Mel Brooks movie. It doesn't feel like an Agatha Christie movie. I recently watched Murder by Death because we were watching that Truman Capote TV show. And I was like, ooh, this Murder by Death looks a lot like Clue. And they portrayed it in the TV show. Murder by Death is garbage and really racist. And Clue is a little homophobic and really fun.
Mm-hmm.
The story is a bunch of people get invited to a house, and it turns out they all have something in common, and it is that they're all being blackmailed by the same person. Who is that person? And while they're trying to figure it out, people start getting bumped off. And it's hilarious. I mean, I don't have that much to say about it, except that like it's Tim Curry at his absolute finest. A lot of people know Tim Curry most from Rocky Horror Picture Show or from It, if you're broken inside. But Clue is how I've like really come to know and love Tim Curry. He's just Congo also because I'm a little broken.
Oh, yeah.
I like Congo. I like it, but it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the centerpiece of this movie, while everyone else sort of like bounces off of him and each other. And I say Mel Brooks because it has a lot of Mel Brooks favorites in it.
Madeline Kahn,
yeah. And then Christopher Lloyd just playing a creep. Tell me, but you said you laughed your ass off. So you liked the movie?
Oh, loved it. Yeah, really, really loved it. Christopher Lloyd has a number of amazingly funny lines in it. And it was funny, too, when I was watching it, my wife and kid and I all watched it together. And Viv looked at, she goes, is that Doc Brown? Like he looks so, he looks so much younger. And I was like, well, this actually came out the same year as Back to the Future. And she just kind of like I could see the gears turning. She's like, she's not as familiar with the different looks of Christopher Lloyd as maybe as we are.
Well, I'm really happy you brought that up because throughout my childhood, I always thought Christopher Lloyd was about to die because he looked so old in Back to the Future. And then even in Dennis the Menace, he looks like crap because they've made him up to look like this awful homeless guy. Mm-hmm. And then he just keeps on living. And it's because he wasn't that old when Back to the Future came out. They made him look much older. It's really amazing what Back to the Future did.
Oh yeah, he looks totally, yeah, it just looks totally different. But this movie also reminded me of what's the Vincent Price movie we did for the pod, the
Yeah,
House on Haunting of Hill House, or
House on Haunted Hill.
House of Haunted Hill. Yeah, yeah, there we go. But yeah, I mean, the setup for the movie is almost, I mean, almost identical to that movie where, yeah, a bunch of people show up to a house. There's like Tim Curry's like the facilitator of the whole thing. And it reminded me a lot of that. But then, you know, it just brings the funny after that, just scene by scene. And I mean, you've got this whole, I mean, you already mentioned the cast and everything. I mean, everybody in the movie is funny. They've all got great lines. They've all got great little sequences in it. I mean, there's just not a weak link in the movie, and there's not an unfunny person in it. I mean, they're all funny. What's the guy's name? The guy who plays Gene Parmesan in Arrested Development. Who's he?
Martin Mull. Yeah.
We always get excited when we see him. You know, we have to yell out Gene every time we see him, you know, for in honor of Jessica Walter. We miss you.
I read a very crazy thing the other day. Martin Mull was only ever in one episode of Arrested Development, but it feels like that character showed up time and time and time again. But it was just that he shows up 5 different times in that episode.
No, I refuse to believe that.
So we should look it up right now, because I also had a hard time believing it. Martin Mull, Arrested Development. Because I also was like, how is it possible?
That's like when we found my wife and looked up Patrick Warburton, you know, Putty in Seinfeld. He's only in 10 episodes. And yet I remember him as like being so in the show.
Okay, so I'll put it this way. He does come back, but in the original series, like seasons 1, 2, 3, 1 episode. And so I don't think those Netflix series should really count.
They don't. They absolutely. In fact, we're talking about that. My wife were like, "Oh, what's our next show? Maybe we should rewatch Arrested Development." But we're not including 4 and 5 because they're unwatchable.
Right. So he's in 3 episodes of season 4. So if that's not counting, then he's literally only in 1 episode of Arrested Development.
I'm choosing not to believe that.
I'm just
willfully ignoring the facts.
It's such a testament to his comedic presence. So it's funny because I always think he's dead. He's very much alive. The reason I think he's dead is because he played the future hypothetical version of a real person who had died in the movie A Futile and Stupid Gesture about the beginning of the National Lampoon. For some reason, I so associate him with that character that I'm like, oh no, he died. So at this point, we know Martin Mull actually has died. We recorded this oddly like 5 days before his death. Rest in peace, Martin Mull. And now, I guess, at least the one silver lining is his existential status lines up with what I thought it was, but it's quite a big price to pay for losing such a very, very funny actor.
Yeah. Oh, I remember him from, did you watch Roseanne as a kid?
I did, but I don't remember him being in it.
Yeah, he had a part on there. He was, I remember his name was Leon, and I feel like he like owned the restaurant. I remember when Roseanne and her sister Jackie worked in a restaurant. I feel like he was like the owner of the restaurant they worked at or something.
Got it.
Something like that. I remember I don't remember it very well. I haven't watched it as an adult, but I remember him being on that show too. That's kind of what I remember him from, or what I first knew him from.
Gotcha. So this movie is filled with people who I thought are dead. Like Leslie Ann Warren, I also assumed was dead because she's just not really in stuff anymore. But when I was growing up, I knew her from this and from the Mel Brooks movie Life Stinks. And then the craziest thing about the cast of this movie is that Colleen Camp plays the bombshell Yvette, right? The like very busty, showing all her skin maid. Colleen Camp doesn't quite look like that anymore. You know, age gets the best of all of us. But when I watch the Clue now, I'm like, I'm always surprised it was Colleen Camp because it seems like a role that was tailor-made for Terry Garr, and it just isn't Terry Garr. So kind of surprising. But but she's perfect as Yvette. She's absolutely perfect. And I have to ask you, because you watched it recently, are there any specific lines that you remember?
I'd have to look it up. It was like a couple weeks ago.
Okay, fair enough, because there are 2 that stick with me forever. One is Michael McKean at the very end of the movie saying, "I'm going home to sleep with my wife." And number 2 is Madeline Kahn's line, flames on the side of my face. So me and my sisters would say that to each other growing up, flames on the side of my face. And when I got old enough, I started seeing like people made those into like little buttons and badges and bumper stickers.
Oh, really?
I was like, good. I'm glad I'm not the only person that really resoneted with.
One thing about Colleen Camp, though, too, is I was kept looking at her. I was like, well, obviously, you know, you're supposed to look at her, and she's supposed to be distracting. But I kept looking at her. I was like, what do I know her from? What do I know her from? And I looked it up. She has a very, very small part but she is Tracy Flick's mom in Election.
Yep, sure is.
Yeah, and that was like what I knew her. I was like, man, I did not. I had to look it up. I was like, I would not have, certainly would not have put that together.
Yeah, she's also like one of the fellow cops in Die Hard with a Vengeance. She's in Wayne's World. She's in
Oh
Apocalypse
wow,
Now. I mean, she was all over. She's in American Hustle.
Apocalypse
She's
Now?
all over the place.
Wow.
My favorite there in Apocalypse Now is and will always be Harrison Ford.
Oh yeah, well, and Larry Fishburne back when he was still Larry.
Fishburne's in like a mover of the plot in that boat scene, but Ford just shows up at the beginning to give some orders out.
Yeah, and then that's it. And then he's gone.
Yep.
One quote that I really liked from Clue is with when Wadsworth talking to Professor Plum, and he says, you were once a professor of psychiatry specializing in helping paranoid and homicidal lunatics suffering from delusions of grandeur. Yes, but now I work for the United Nations, so your work has not changed. I loved that. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of really good. I mean, it's one that like you probably watch over and over again, and hear new funny lines in it that you didn't hear before. Or Wadsworth says at one point where they do the Gone with the Wind thing. Frankly, Scarlet, I don't give a damn, but the way they put it in there is really funny, and
because Miss Scarlet is a character. Yeah,
this is super clever.
Well, you say you could watch it tons of times and get something different out of it every time. If you went to see it in the movie theater when it came out, you would have seen a different ending every time because those multiple endings that we get in the version that's streaming now were not all there when you saw it in the theater. And the only other movie I can think of that did this, I think maybe Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. They've done it with like in different versions of how the movie's been released. Like the Netflix version is different than the home video version. The Blu-ray version is different than the DVD version. Really? Just like little things here and there are different. Yeah. But the only movie I can think of that had like drastically different stuff in it was Gremlins 2. Had different things depending on when you would see it in the theater. Like that Hulk Hogan scene. I remember I didn't remember Hulk Hogan being in Gremlins 2, and it drove me nuts. And it was because he's not in every version of Gremlins 2.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's not the first time this has happened, or maybe it was the first time, but either way, it's just like a very interesting way to do it. There's a new documentary about Brian Eno that's playing at the Film Forum right now, and every time you see it during its run, it has a different ending. Or maybe just like it's a different movie somehow.
Interesting.
Pretty cool. I'm not a Brian Eno guy, but
I like him. Wait, Brian Eno, the producer?
The music producer.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah, I know him. I mean, he works with U2 and stuff a lot, so I'm familiar with Brian Eno. You love U2.
Can't even do like a twitchy face. Okay. Did either of these movies get nominated for any Oscars?
Clue did not, but Witness was actually a pretty big Oscar player that year. It won 2, and it was nominated for 6 additional awards. The awards that it won for Best Original Screenplay, and it won for Best Film Editing. And then it was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Peter Weir. That was the first time he had been nominated. Also, as I mentioned before, Best Actor, Harrison Ford. And then also Best Cinematography, Art Direction, and Original Score. So 2 for 8. That's a pretty good tally for Witness.
All right, cool. Do you want to do our top 10s of 1985?
I would love to do a top 10 of 1985. There's some good movies this year.
Why don't you start?
All right, I will start with number 10 is the film I almost picked for you for this podcast. Very similar. Hadn't seen it since high school. Only watched it when I started watching the Best Picture nominees. It's a John Huston film with Jack Nicholson and Angelica Houston, kind of a mobster movie called Prizzi's Honor. Very good. My number 9 is the Paul Rubens adventure, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is just a delightful movie that I didn't watch until very recently, actually.
Oh, wow.
Or hadn't seen since I was a kid, probably when it came out, hadn't seen since then until very recently.
Did you rewatch it in honor of Paul Rubens' death?
I did. I watched all 3 because there's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and then Big Top Pee-wee, and then the Netflix one that had come out just a couple years ago, which I didn't watch when it came out. So yeah, I watched all 3 when he passed.
I really like the second one, but don't like the third one.
You do like the second one?
Yeah, I mean, I came up on it, but I think it's quirky and fun.
Yeah, the first one I think is obviously far and away the best, and the second one's kind of less good, and the third one I thought was like kind of okay.
Joe Manganiello's funny, I guess.
Yeah. I like him. Number 8 is the Best Picture winner from that year, Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, The Grand Romance Out of Africa. Not for everyone. It's a little bit slow. It's kind of romance. It's a little bit English patient-y. That gives you a frame of reference. Number 7, this feels a little bit low, but you'll see when I have movies that are above it. It's just a pretty good year for movies. Number 7, I have Clue. Number 6, I don't know if you've seen this movie or not, but it's a really kind of wild movie for Scorsese. It's After Hours. Have you seen After Hours?
Yeah, it's number 11 on my list.
11 for you? Okay, cool. Yeah, I really love After Hours. I think it's kind of a different thing for him. I can't remember the actor's name now, but I love the main guy in that. I thought he was really, really good in it.
Griffin Dunn. After Hours is like a lot of people are like, After Hours is actually Scorsese's best movie. I live in New York City and I don't think so, but it's got a really, really fun Terry Garr part. Speaking of Terry Garr, and Catherine O'Hara is so funny in it, but it's just a little, it's funny because I like weird stuff, but this one's a little weird for me.
It might be his Scorsese's funniest movie, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's his best by
No.
any stretch of the imagination. I just think it's the sixth best movie of 1985 from what I've seen.
Fair enough.
Number 5 is a movie we've talked about before. One of our favorite actors, Philip Baker Hall. It's a movie that only Philip Baker Hall is in. It's called Secret Honor, where Philip Baker Hall just monologues the entire movie as Richard Nixon.
So I don't have that on my list this year because of how Letterboxd does their years.
Yep. So that's, yeah, I thought that might happen, but for me, that's in my top 5 there. I love Richard.
Philip Baker Hall.
Philip Baker, why did I say Richard? Oh, because Richard Nixon, yeah. Philip Baker Hall, yeah, he's amazing in this. It's just, yeah, so one guy in a room, and it's compelling as hell. It's just really, really a cool movie.
It's almost an impossible movie because it was directed by Robert Altman, and it seems like it shouldn't be possible for Altman to direct a movie where people aren't talking over each other, but they can't. Right? There's only one person in it.
It's a pretty unique entry in his filmography for sure.
Yeah.
Number 4 is I have the aforementioned Witness, which we've talked about at length. That's my number 4 movie of the year. Very strong. Number 3, I have Steven Spielberg's The Color Purple, which was just remade last year as a musical based, on the Broadway play that they had done. Color Purple also features Danny Glover in a villainous role, so he was just really high on the villainous roles in 1985. I mean, he was just king jerk that year.
Is that the Coleman Domingo role?
Yes. Whoopi Goldberg is amazing in this. Oprah Winfrey was just great in it. A really, really excellent movie. And Spielberg didn't get nominated that year. It's one of the movies, it's got an Oscar, infamous, I guess, in Oscar history. It had 11 nominations, didn't win a single one, and didn't get a nomination for the director. So
very weird.
Sorry, Greta, you're in good company with directors who didn't get nominated. My number 2, I'm assuming this won't be on your list either because of release dates, but it came out in the States in January of 1985. The Coen brothers' debut film, Blood Simple. I've talked about it before. We had a whole podcast about the Coen, ranking the Coen movies, but I love Blood Simple. M. Emmett Walsh is amazing. Dan Hedaya is amazing. Frances McDormand's amazing. I love Blood Simple. And number 1, no surprise, one of my favorite movies of all time. One of the greatest of the decade, Back to the Future. I mean, what do you need to say about Back to the Future? We already talked about Christopher Lloyd and how old he looks and everything, but it's just, for my money, it's a perfect movie, and I've maybe seen it more times than I've seen any other movie. When I used to work at a video store, I always had this Wednesday 9 to 6 shift, and it was a really, really slow video store, and there was never, almost never any business. So, every Wednesday, I would watch the trilogy every single Wednesday, and I did this for probably about a year. So I've probably seen the original Back to the Future, at least over 100 times, and I still love it every time.
That's an insane amount of times to have seen a film. So we don't have that much overlap, actually, and a lot of it is because of release date stuff. But so like I mentioned, just because we talked about it in this podcast, Witness is my number 12, After Hours is my number 11. The other movies that have made it onto this list but don't make it quite 10, Cocoon, the movie about old people and aliens, Angel's Egg, which is a very strange Mamoru Oshii movie. It's like an experimental animated film, and then a made-for-TV film in the Hercule Poirot Peter Ustinov series called 13 at Dinner, which is a lot of fun and co-stars Faye Dunaway and Bill Nighy. Good, not great. Yeah, a lot of fun. All right, my number 10 is a movie that is very divisive because it scared the crap out of a lot of people, even though it's a children's movie. But it's Walter Murch's Return to Oz, the sequel to The Wizard of Oz, starring Fairuza Balk. This movie's unhinged, and I like it a lot. It's very strange. It has a lot of cool puppetry. It has a lot of cool stop motion effects for the villain. Yeah, I quite like Return to Oz.
Yeah, haven't seen it since I was a kid, so I'd be interested to go back to it.
I think it's cool. My number 9 is an Albert Brooks movie called Lost in America. This whole movie is basically him trying to change his life with his wife, Julie Haggerty, and her gumming up the works because she has OCD, it seems like. It's a very frustrating movie. It's very, very funny. It's the whole movie is basically one extended fight between the two of them. My number 8 is Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Have you seen Brazil?
That's a big hole. Big hole in my never did it.
I talked about Brazil a lot when we first started the show because we reviewed 8.5, and I think there's a lot of overlap between 8.5 and Brazil, and then Beau is Afraid on the other end. Yeah, it's just like I used to have this list, and then I was like, I don't want to keep this list on Letterboxd anymore. Oppressive bureaucracy or fascist bureaucracy. But basically, it's like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which the enemy is bureaucracy, and the drive to escape it is your need for freedom. It's very good. Jonathan Pryce, and then Robert De Niro has an interesting cameo / he shows up a couple of times doing cool stuff in this movie, including one of the coolest effect shots where De Niro gets covered in paper and then like disappears into nothingness. It's very, very neat. My number 7 is Akira Kurosawa's Ran. This was his late period war epic. I think it is loosely based on a Shakespearean work that King Lear, right? Loosely based on King Lear. I'm not familiar with King Lear, so I couldn't really say. But in a really post-Technicolor era, it's as close to a Technicolor movie as you're going to get, and it's really wild the way he uses color in this movie. My number 6 is Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which I also rewatched after Paul Rubens died and totally love, and talked about at work recently because someone was talking about, I asked them if they were ready for a meeting that I was late to, and they were like, I've been ready. I'm like, you've been ready since first call? And they didn't know what I was referring to, but I did. My number 5 is The Goonies. Do you not like The Goonies?
Why do I not have The Goonies on my... maybe I just don't have it marked on Letterboxd, but because I just haven't watched it in a while. But yeah, I love The Goonies. Definitely grew up with The Goonies, yeah.
So The Goonies is my favorite Richard Donner movie. I just think it's so great. It has no weird suicidal stuff like Lethal Weapon. I haven't seen Superman in a very long time, so maybe that's better than I remember. But I just think it's so great about a group of kids who their homes are at risk of being turned into a golf course, and they go on one last great adventure to find treasure, to try to buy off the golf people, and try to find pirate treasure. It's incredible. It's a great movie. It's like the ultimate example of what a great teen / preteen movie can be. Not without its, problems. It's a little off color for modern audiences, but I still think it's wonderful.
Yep.
Number 4 is not on your list because of release date stuff, but we've talked about it before. It's Tom Popo. In fact, it even shows up in our 1986 or 1987, actually, I think, episode, but I have it on my list for 1985 because that's when it came out in Japan. So we have an episode coming up next week where we're talking about the movie Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, and it stars Koji Yakusho, who a lot of people know now from being in Perfect Days, but he was the star of Cure, and he plays the man in the white suit in Tom Popo. Yeah. So just a great movie about loving food. My number 3 is Clue. My number 2 is a movie that I almost recommended for you for this year, but then I think we're actually doing it for maybe we're doing it for 1980. Oh no, it came out in America in 1985 too. So no, I guess I just chose Clue for you over it because this one is a tough watch, but you should watch it sometime. It's called Come and See.
Yeah.
So this is about the effect of the Nazi invasion of the USSR. It was a Soviet film, really, but of the Nazi invasion of the USSR and some of the resistance to it. And it is just really, really hard to watch, but very excellently made, really compelling. The makeup in it really makes it because it's about a young boy who's experiencing this Nazi invasion and how he looks very like young and sprightly in the beginning. And then by the end of the movie, this young boy looks like he's 100 years old. It's really wild. And then my number 1 is also Back to the Future. Not much else to say about it. It's iconic for a reason. It's so much fun to watch. It spawned a great trilogy that thankfully has only been spun off into a cartoon show and not, legacy sequels. And I think given this fact that Christopher Lloyd is very, very old and Michael J. Fox is very, very afflicted, I don't think we'll be getting a legacy sequel. At least I've got my fingers crossed that we don't need it.
Yeah, I think there's actually a contractual clause. There's something like Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale have something that's like, you cannot do this as long as we're alive, sort of thing. Like they won't allow it to be done. So like I'm assuming is when Zemeckis and Gale both pass away, then we'll probably get someone will remake it or something.
Well, I can't say I'm thrilled about that, but Bob Zemeckis is not terribly old. He's in his 70s, so there could still be time. There's still time.
There's still time. Hey, I don't want to take too much time on this because I know we're right towards the end, but I thought of this. We're thinking about it with the trilogy, and when we were talking about our Pixar episode, when we were talking about the Toy Story trilogy. Now, is it fair to rank trilogies? Like, say, can you rank the Toy Story, the original trilogy, as its own thing, like in terms of ranking film trilogies, or is it not a trilogy anymore, like that they've introduced a 4th film?
Okay, that's a great question, and I have a set opinion about this.
Yeah,
I think the Toy Story...
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. I think the Toy Story trilogy is a trilogy, and you can rank it as such, because when they made Toy Story 3, they made that movie with the idea that we might not make another movie, and it has some finality to the ending. Whereas you can't call The Hunger Games a trilogy because the third movie is part 3 of 4, right? Like the third movie is part 1 of 2, even of itself.
Right.
So that's for sure a quadrilogy. You can't call Harry Potter 1, 2, and 3 a trilogy because the story is not even close to being over yet. Whereas you can call, I think you can also call like, what else? Let's think of another example of something that you can call a trilogy that had a movie come after.
What about Die Hard? Because they went on and made some more shitty Die Hard movies after the original 3.
Well, yes, you can. I would say yes, you absolutely can, because the third movie ties back into the first movie. And then those other movies after are, it actually feels like John McClane is a different character in those movies.
It really does, yeah. Wow, yeah, those last two are really so bad.
Yeah. Then where it gets tricky is things like Terminator. Because Terminator 3, like really, Terminator 1 and 2 feel like a story told. And then Terminator 3 comes in with a different cast and sort of upends what you know about the story. And then Terminator 4 goes into like different, I like Terminator 4, but it goes into like different, I like 4 more than 3, but it goes into like different weird territory. And then 5 and 6 are very bad. So it's tough with a franchise like that. Okay, so here's a question for you. If 3 movies are not made with the intention of being a trilogy, but they just keep making, like John Wick, they're like, we're just going to keep checking these out because we have cool ideas for them. Is it even worthwhile thinking about them in terms of how the whole looks? Let's take Lone Wolf and Cub.
Yeah.
That's not the complete story told. They made 6 movies, and they didn't finish the story. So it was just like, we're going to make a movie serial. And if it ends, it ends. It doesn't, it doesn't. So I'm wondering, like, unless you have something like The Lord of the Rings or The Godfather, I guess.
Right, that's a definitive ending, yeah.
Yeah. Is it even worthwhile to think about it as a trilogy? Like Before Sunrise, right? You have Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight. Those were made on a schedule. That schedule has now passed. It has been more than 9 years since Before Midnight came out. So if another movie comes out, is it worthwhile to think about the Before trilogy as a trilogy anymore? And is it worth thinking about the Before trilogy as a trilogy now, since the mood of that third one is so different than the mood of the first 2?
I would think in that sense, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that trilogy, and you know what, maybe we should at some point. But I still think that counts as a full trilogy, because I think it captures that couple at 3 very distinct points in their life, and the mood is very different in that third movie, but yeah, so is life. Like life is very different at those, at those points. Your life is very different, from where they were in the second movie versus where it was in the third movie. So I think it makes sense that the mood is very different. And I think those 3 movies do make sense as a coherent trilogy.
That's really interesting. Okay, that has nothing to do with anything we talked about on this episode, which
Total
you warned us. But yeah, let's come back to that. Make a note. We should do something about the Before trilogy, because I love talking about it.
Oh yeah, and like I said, another one that my wife's never done. We've been talking about watching the whole run of them. So yeah, let's put a pin in it.